Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Justin Bogie, a senior policy analyst in fiscal affairs at Heritage's Grover M. Hermann Center for the Federal Budget. Justin, thanks so much for joining the Ben Shapiro Show.
Hey, Ben, great to be with you.
So why don't we discuss the story that nobody is talking about, because obviously we've got impeachments and peace plans and everything else, but it is the story that probably matters most, and that is the United States continues to blow out its budget deficit each and every year. Republican, Democrat, doesn't seem to matter. So what is the story with America's budget deficit at this point?
Yeah, and absolutely. This is something nobody's really talking about. We're not getting enough attention to, but there was a new CBO report that came out yesterday, their latest budget and economic projections for the next 10 years, and it's just showing that we're continuing down this really unsustainable budget path. Deficits are expected to pass $1 trillion this year by the end of the next decade, up to over $1.7 trillion annually. Debt's going to balloon to almost 100% of GDP, over $31 trillion. It's a bad situation. What's really driving it is spending. This isn't a problem of not enough revenue. We're taking in plenty of taxes. We're right at the historical average or a little above. It's definitely a spending problem driven mostly by healthcare and Social Security.
So given that fact, and the fact that nobody's doing anything about this, and nobody probably will do anything about this, should we even pay attention to this, or should we just basically ignore it until it's time for austerity? Because it seems like that's the direction the country is moving.
Well, I'm not optimistic that we'll get changes this year or maybe even in the next 5 years, but it's a really important story. This is something that does impact Americans, whether they believe it or not. I know we talk about these huge numbers, trillions of dollars. It's really hard to resonate with the average person, but this is money that's coming out of the U.S. economy. That's coming out of your wallet. It means less take-home pay for you. It means potentially higher interest rates and inflations, and the cost of products goes up. This absolutely has an impact on each American, whether they realize it or not. So we need to keep the pressure on lawmakers to address this. It's going to be hard to get to the perfect solution for either party, but I think there are reforms that are out there now that could at least slow the growth of spending and kind of get things headed in the right direction. It's going to take some bolder steps later, but we can start that process.
So, Justin, let's talk about what exactly is causing the deficit. You mentioned that a lot of this is sort of built into the spending. So a lot of people will say things on the left like, this is military spending and tax cuts. How much are military spending and tax cuts responsible for the current gap between government revenues, meaning tax revenue, and government spending?
Well, very, very little. The tax cuts, I was talking to someone at lunch today from the administration, and they say that there's evidence that when you take the tax cuts and other policies that they've put into place, they've actually already paid for themselves. And the thing is, the tax cuts are set to expire in 2025. If that happens and revenues start going up, that doesn't mean that deficits are going to go down. Historically, when you have more revenues coming in, that just means more spending. So it's not going to make much of a difference on the deficit. Military spending, if you kind of look back over the long run as a share of the economy, it's actually gone down. So to say that this is all on defense spending is also false. You could get rid of the entire defense budget. You could get rid of basically the entire discretionary spending budget, which is about a third of the federal budget, and we still wouldn't balance the budget over the long term. So it's really those mandatory programs that are driving this.
Okay, so given the fact that these mandatory programs are driving this, and given the fact that these are the third rail of American politics, President Trump has pledged not to really do anything about Social Security, although now he's making noises that he may reform Social Security a little bit. Given the fact that nobody is touching Medicare or Medicaid, that this is seen as sort of a political death sentence. You're seeing this from Joe Biden right now, who's denying that he ever was concerned about Social Security, right? That 20 years ago when he was proposing changes to Social Security that would help prolong the viability of the system, that he was dead wrong to do so, and instead you got Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders pledging to actually increase benefits for programs that are completely bankrupt at this point, like right now. So what is the viability of changes to these programs, and how easily could changes be made? How much pain would have to be endured?
Well, at some point, first of all, I don't think there's any choice but to make changes, because Medicare and Social Security are both on a path to insolvency. There's not going to be enough money left in the trust funds to actually pay full benefits. So everybody's going to be facing a cut. But you're right, it's a very tough issue politically. But think about this. You bring up Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. If we implemented all of the policies that they are talking about, if you taxed everyone, I think the stat is if you taxed everyone who makes over $200,000, like at 100%, including businesses, that it still wouldn't pay for everything that they're talking about doing. So that's really a scary reality, or a scary thing to think about when we're already at this. When we're soon be pushing 100% of GDP in debt, and the projections to go off much higher after that. So, and in terms of how much pain, I think it depends on the reforms. There's a lot of people who could afford not to be on Medicare, or some of these other programs. And there's also this idea that people should have more control over their retirement. Not everyone should have to put all of their money into Social Security. They should have more choice into what they're doing. So I think it depends on what approach you take.
So we are speaking with Justin Bogie, Senior Policy Analyst in Fiscal Affairs at Heritage's Grover M. Hermann Center for the Federal Budget. So given the fact that all of this seems to be going nowhere, obviously, as we look forward, you talked a little bit about the ramifications of the budget deficit, which, of course, Republicans only seem to care about as soon as Democrats are in office, and Democrats never care about regardless of who's in office.
Yeah, this is a bipartisan problem, definitely.
I mean, as we move forward with all this, you mentioned the problems of inflation, you mentioned the problem of countries starting to not trust our debt. There's this theory that's been put forward mainly by the Elizabeth Warren files, this modern monetary theory idea that so long as the United States is the strongest economy on planet Earth, people will continue to buy our bonds, even if they believe that we are just kicking the can down the road. If we are... Yeah. So what is the truth to that? Is there really a point at which the bill comes due for this stuff?
Well, I don't think we want to test that theory. First of all, I don't think we want to get to that point, but we're already spending almost $400 billion a year just on interest payments on the national debt. That number is projected to double over the next decade, and that's money that instead of going to American households, it's coming out of your pocket, and it's going to pay our foreign debtors, the people who are buying our debt. And number one on that list, number one or two, is China. China and Japan are the number one and two holders, foreign holders of U.S. debt. So I don't know. We certainly don't want it to become more expensive or be sending more money to those countries because we can't get our spending under control and stop racking up these massive amounts of debt. We're just taking money directly out of the U.S. economy and sending it to China, basically.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Justin Bogie of the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for fighting on a topic that really should matter more to Americans, but obviously doesn't seem to matter much to them until the bill comes due. Appreciate your time, Justin.
Thank you very much.
Are you coming up?